Chapter number 14. All right, so famous passage here. The context is basically we've just had all of the different plagues that came to Egypt over and over again. That cycle of just Moses going to Pharaoh, asking to let the people go. God would harden his heart. He would say no. And we've just, come to the end of that. Exodus chapter number 14, now we're leaving. And they're chasing after them, and we're just going to read through it here and just read about what happened. We'll stop at some points in the middle. But Exodus chapter number 14, and verse number 1, it says, "And the Lord spake unto Moses, saying, Speak unto the children of Israel that they turn and encamp before Pihahiroth, between Migdol and the sea, over against Baal-zephon. Before it ye shall encamp by the sea. For Pharaoh will say to the children of Israel, They are entangled in the land, the wilderness has shut them in. And I will harden Pharaoh's heart, that he shall follow after them. And I will be honored upon Pharaoh and upon all his hosts, that the Egyptians may know that I am the Lord. And they did so. And it was told the king of Egypt that the people fled. And the heart of Pharaoh and his servants was turned against the people. And they said, Why have we done this, that we let Israel go from serving us? And he made ready his chariot, and took his people with him, and took 600 chosen chariots, and all the chariots of Egypt, and captains over every one of them. And the Lord hardened the heart of Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and he pursued after the children of Israel, and the children of Israel went out with a high hand. And the Egyptians pursued after them all the horses and chariots of Pharaoh, and his horsemen and his army, and overtook them, encamping by the sea, beside Pihahiroth, before Baal-zephon. And when Pharaoh drew nigh, the children of Israel lifted up their eyes, and behold, the Egyptians marched after them. And they were sore afraid, and the children of Israel cried out unto the Lord. And they said unto Moses, Because there were no graves in Egypt, hast thou taken us away to die in the wilderness? Wherefore hast thou dealt thus with us, to carry us forth out of Egypt? Is not this the word that we did tell thee in Egypt, saying, Let us alone, that we may serve the Egyptians? For it had been better for us to serve the Egyptians, that we should die in the wilderness. And Moses said unto the people, Fear ye not, stand still, and see the salvation of the Lord, which he will show you to this day. For the Egyptians whom ye have seen today, ye shall see them again no more forever. The Lord shall fight for you, and ye shall hold your peace. Amen. And the Lord said unto Moses, Wherefore criest thou unto me? Speak unto the children of Israel that they go forward. But lift thou up thy rod, and stretch out thine hand over the sea, and divide it. And the children of Israel shall go on dry ground through the midst of the sea. And behold, I will harden the hearts of the Egyptians, and they shall follow them. And I will give me honor upon Pharaoh, and upon all his hosts, upon his chariots, and upon his horsemen. And the Egyptians shall know that I am the Lord, when I have gotten me honor upon Pharaoh, upon his chariots, and upon his horsemen. And the angel of God, which went before the camp of Israel, removed and went behind them. And the pillar of the cloud went from before their face and stood behind them. And it came between the camp of the Egyptians and the camp of Israel. And it was a cloud of darkness to them, but it gave light by night to these, so that the one came not near the other all the night. And this is what I want you to pay attention to, what we're going to talk about. And Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and the Lord caused the sea to go back by a strong east wind all that night, and made the sea dry land where the waters were divided. And the children of Israel went into the midst of the sea upon dry ground, and the waters were a wall unto them on their right hand and on their left. So this is a very famous story where we can see the parting of the Red Sea. And many people, when they talk about the Bible, skeptics of the Bible, will try to talk about, the parting of the Red Sea was actually not referring to the Red Sea. It was referring to some other smaller body of water that was more shallow, and that's what was parted. Which the thing is, any body of water that's parted and you're walking on dry ground is still a miracle, whether it was the Red Sea or whether it's the Atlantic Ocean. Right. So either way, it's a miracle. But, this was the Red Sea that was parted. And imagine just sitting there and being present at that day. We read about it and think that it's amazing, but just imagine you go to sleep and then you wake up in the morning and you see this guy raise up a rod, and then all of a sudden the waters just part and you can just walk through it. Imagine that. right? And just seeing the waters like that. We can't even comprehend it. You might see on Facebook and things like that, people are making these like AI videos or just these dramatic, crazy things and whatever else. But this was real. This actually happened, and it was truly unbelievable. Now imagine at that same moment that you're standing next to somebody, and then they look at you and they're just like, "Hey, you see all this? Don't forget it." Could you imagine forgetting it? And just seeing that, if someone looked at you and was like, "Hey, don't forget that this happened," it's like, what do you mean? This is the most insane thing I've ever seen in my life. And something that's interesting that I've thought about, and I'm sure you've heard of before about, the older you get, the faster it seems like time goes and things like this. So I spent some time researching, why that is. And, without making the sermon be a whole psychology lesson, basically, when you experience something that you've already experienced before, your brain isn't going to put that into long-term memory. Like the first time that you tasted like what milk was like, your brain had to do a little bit of extra work and just put into your memory, this is what milk tastes like. Or the first time maybe you climbed up Mount Pleasant and saw what that looked like, it was just, wow, I can't believe I'm up here. But if you did it 100 times and you stand up there, you get up to the top, and now you're kind of just like, yep, this is what Lancaster looks like from this vantage point. And then you climb back down. And so the older you get, the more experience you have and the more things that you do over and over and over again. And it just isn't creating these extra big, impactful memories. I feel like a lot of times, just with my job, I almost kind of live the same exact day over and over and over again. Like I'm going to go to bed tonight, and I'm going to wake up tomorrow, and I'm going to sit down at my desk, and I'm going to work my job for about 9 hours, and I'm going to stop. And I'll hang out with my family for a little bit, maybe we'll watch a movie or something, and then we'll eat dinner, we'll all go to bed, and I'll wake up and I'll do the exact same thing the next day. I'm not making long-term memories when I'm working my job that way. So time goes by a little bit faster. This, for every single person, in every area of life, was a long-term memory. No one ever saw anything like this before. No one would ever see anything like this again. And that truly demonstrated the power of God. And right before this, you've got basically Pharaoh and all of his servants. They've got their hearts hardened. They're wanting to chase after them. They regret letting them go. Even after all the firstborn in the land of Egypt died, they're chasing after all of them. The children of Israel are sitting back yelling at Moses, "What did you even bring us out for here? We didn't even want to go. We wanted to stay and serve the Egyptians. We wanted to remain captive." And in the midst of all that, the purpose that God did this was to demonstrate his power. And it was specifically that all of the land of Egypt would know that he is the Lord. Right. And you read just a couple more verses down, we're not going to for the sake of time, but the children of Israel got over on dry ground, they got to the other side, and all the Egyptians and all their chariots that chased after them found out that God is the Lord. That's right. And they were swallowed up by those waters whole, in every single one of them, and you can see in verse number 30, it says, "Thus the Lord saved Israel that day out of the hand of the Egyptians, and Israel saw the Egyptians dead upon the seashore." So all of them went in there, they were swallowed up, and bodies washed up to the shore. So all the people on the other side and all the Egyptians that saw those chariots go out, and they saw all the other actions of the Lord, Egypt in that day knew that the God of Israel was the Lord. Amen. And that was it. Now, go over a few chapters to Exodus chapter number 32. So we see this miracle happen, and we see these amazing things, and we see all of the ability for God to sustain them while they were out there. And, reading through the first 5 books of the Bible and just seeing the children of Israel can be kind of a frustrating read. You guys just had one of the most amazing miracles performed right before your eyes. And now, Exodus chapter number 32, go ahead and look in verse number 1. Just for context, at most, 3 months have passed. Like 90 days at the most. It could be somewhere around like 75. But somewhere between 2 to 3 months ago, the Red Sea was parted, and they were completely rescued, 0 casualties, completely safe on the other side, and they walked across that sea on dry ground. Okay? 2.5, 3 months goes by. Look at Exodus chapter number 32. And when the people saw that Moses delayed to come down out of the mount, the people gathered themselves together unto Aaron and said unto him, Up, make us gods which shall go before us. For as for this Moses, who's Moses? The man that brought us up out of the land of Egypt, we wot not what is become of him. So all of these people that observed this miracle are just like, Moses went up to the mountain. We don't know what happened to him. He's the guy that brought us out of the land of Egypt. Aaron, can you make us some gods really quick? And you're familiar with the story, but Aaron basically is like, yeah, sure, and just break off all the golden earrings and things like that, and I'll throw them into the fire. And, eventually Moses comes down and confronts Aaron about what happened, and Aaron goes, I don't know. I just had all these people give me this gold, and I threw it into the fire, and a calf popped out. Like he didn't form the golden calf idol for them to worship and everything else. But, like 3 months go by, and all these people have just experienced this wonderful miracle, this wonderful redemption from God, where Moses said that they would see the salvation of the Lord in that day. And 3 months later, they're back to worshiping idols. And really, even before that, they're complaining. And what I want to talk about tonight is specifically remembering God. Remembering God. And you notice as you're reading through, looking all over the place and just seeing all the different scriptures, especially throughout the Old Testament, over and over and over again, they're being told to remember the Lord. And you think about that, that sounds like kind of a ridiculous thing. How could you forget the parting of the Red Sea? How could you forget all of the ability to sustain it? How could you forget the manna from heaven that God gives you every single day? Right. But they did, and they were right back to where they were. So, it's frustrating for us to sit back and think about, why did these people do this? If you think about it from this perspective. The people that saw and literally observed the parting of the Red Sea within a few months were just right back to where they started, completely sinning against God. So how much more vigilant should we be, who have not seen the parting of the Red Sea, who have not physically with our own eyes observed these miracles and just read about them? How much more should we be vigilant to remember God and to think about God and to think about all these things and put them in our remembrance? Now, another example of this, go to the book of Joshua. The book of Joshua. So this is basically after this generation, that generation that their worst fear was dying in the wilderness, as we just saw in Exodus chapter number 14, died in the wilderness because of their disobedience. And now we've got a new generation that is from that same family, but now they're going into the promised land. And in the very end of Joshua chapter number 3, God parts waters again, but this time in the River Jordan, to allow them to go over on dry ground to get to the other side and to get to the promised land. And now look at Joshua chapter number 4, right after this has happened, verse number 1. It says, And it came to pass, when all the people were clean passed over Jordan, that the Lord spake unto Joshua, saying, Take you 12 men out of the people, out of every tribe a man, and command ye them, saying, Take you hence out of the midst of Jordan, and out of the place where the priest's feet stood firm, 12 stones, and ye shall carry them over with you, and leave them in the lodging place where ye shall lodge this night. Then Joshua called the 12 men whom he had prepared for the children of Israel out of the tribe of Dan. And Joshua said unto them, Pass over before the ark of the Lord your God into the midst of Jordan, and take ye up every man of you a stone upon his shoulder, according to the number of the tribes of the children of Israel. Notice that this may be a sign among you, that when your children ask their fathers in the time to come, saying, What mean ye by these stones? Then ye shall answer them that by the waters of Jordan were cut off before the ark of the covenant of the Lord. When it passed over Jordan, the waters of Jordan were cut off, and these stones shall be a memorial unto the children of Israel forever. So basically this time, Joshua is saying, as we're walking over the dry ground, I need 12 men to gather 12 stones from the floor of the dry ground of this river and bring them over to the other side, and we're going to set a pile of 12 stones up, so that when your kids are down by the river playing, people that have not even been thought of. So that when they come down and they see those stones, and they, like every 3-year-old does, go, what's that? Why? What's that? What's that? What's that? And then they look at those stones and they say, why are those stones there? That's a teaching moment for them to tell them about when God parted the Jordan River so that they could walk over into the Promised Land, and how God delivered them from Egypt, delivered them from the wilderness in those 40 years that they spent in the wilderness to finally arrive in the Promised Land. Amen. Right. So a specific purpose. And again, it's like, well, how could you forget that? Well, sometimes it isn't even just that you might forget it. Sometimes it's about, what about the next generation? The next generation might not remember these things. The next generation might not know the impact of these decisions and everything else. And if you go to the book of Judges, in chapter number 2, right after this, the book of Judges, we're just going to read a couple verses here. But the book of Judges in chapter number 2, in verse 10, it says, and also all that generation were gathered unto their fathers, and there arose another generation after them, notice, which knew not the Lord, nor the works which he had done in Israel. You go over to Judges chapter number 3 and verse number 7. This is that new generation, and it says, and the children of Israel did evil in the sight of the Lord, and forgat the Lord their God, and served Baalim in the groves. They forgot. So they had that pile of stones. They had all the stories. They had all these people telling them about all of the wonderful things that were done, all of the great moments of salvation that God had delivered to them and given them all these extra things. But then they forgot. And we get into this just point from the book of Judges on. You know, we actually, in our church in Illinois, one of the books that we went through while I was there was the book of Joshua. And when we talk after church, or just when we'd be going through it during church, one of the things that constantly was brought up is that the book of Joshua is like the one book of the Bible where it's like a generation that wholly followed after the Lord. Mm-hmm. And they still sinned, right? We still have stories in there about like the sin of Achan and things like that, but they handled it like they were supposed to. And sometimes that can be kind of a brutal thing to read, but that generation followed after the Lord. That generation did what they were supposed to do. This is the generation after that generation that forgot the Lord, that didn't know the Lord. And then it's like from this point forward, pretty much until Jesus, we just have this constant cycle of, I don't know the Lord, bad things happen, learn about God again, bad things happen. Just this constant cycle of generation following the Lord, generation doesn't follow the Lord. Generation follows the Lord, generation doesn't follow the Lord. And it's forgetfulness. And you think, how could you forget? How could you forget about the miracles that happened? How could you forget about the deliverance? Well, we forget. We're people. We forget. And just for a moment, something that might make a little bit more sense to us, we're reading about critical moments in the history of ancient Israel. What about critical moments in the United States of America? All right, what about the 4th of July? That's pretty easy to remember, right? It's July 4th. We were talking with the kids, and they were talking about how being excited about the holiday, the 4th of July. And they thought that it was like a couple weeks away. And we were like, you guys know when the 4th of July is? Like, it's July 4th, So, but learning about it. But, we'll be celebrating this year 250 years since July 4th. That's a really exciting thing, right? 250 years as a nation. But July 4th, you think about what that day represented. That represented when they signed the Declaration of Independence, when they became separate from Great Britain and went up against the strongest military in the world, the empire of the world at that time, and some just truly unbelievable things, and were able to completely be independent. The war still lasted for years beyond that point, and then there was another war, the War of 1812, that just struck back up again. But that was a critical moment in our nation's history. And so we have a holiday, the 4th of July, where every single year we get together and we sing patriotic songs and we see fireworks and we celebrate as a nation and as Americans the 4th of July, our independence. Why? Because we're supposed to be remembering the things that they wrote about in those documents that are the identity and the foundation of this country. which would be things like freedom, which would be like life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness. Those are all things that were important to the founding of this country. And so we have holidays and we celebrate, the fireworks, like we sing about in our national anthem, the bombs bursting in air, to remember these things and remember that this freedom that we have is not something that we just got one day. We all are fortunate in this room to have been born with it, but there are thousands upon thousands upon thousands of people that bled and died so that we could have it.
Right.
That's why we celebrate. In the same way with Memorial Day, same type of thing. More directly pointing. The Declaration of Independence signing, July 4th, is when we celebrate the birth, the founding of our nation, the United States of America. Memorial Day is more specific to just remembering the lost soldiers, specifically, that have died, that have fought for our country, whether that would be a war centuries ago or whether that's a war right now that's going on.
Right.
And remembering those lives lost, thinking about those, again, for the same reasons, remembering our freedoms, remembering their sacrifice, remembering to honor them and honor the things that they fought for. It's in vain. Their deaths are in vain if basically every value that makes this country what it is and that sets it apart and that gives us this freedom, if we just sacrifice all that and cast it out to the side, their deaths are in vain. That's why we remember them. That's why we have these holidays, so that we're remembering these things as a nation. Think about this in relation to what we're reading in the book of Exodus, in the book of Joshua, in the book of Judges. They had things that they were supposed to remember that God did for them. And I'm bringing it back to that in a moment, but we also as a nation have things like this. The last one I want to think about is another date that we all remember, but September 11th, right? We remember that. This September, that would be 25 years ago, all right? What New York City is today is mind-boggling compared to what it was 25 years ago. And the big thing with September 11th was never forget. And it's like we just have this slogan that we say, never forget, never forget, never forget. What are we never supposed to forget? Right? And then it's like we forget that there are people, that there are groups of people that hate the American way of life.
Right.
That hate everything about this nation, hate the foundation of it and everything else, and killed over 2,000 people in one day in those attacks. There's so much effort, right, that goes into pulling Christianity out of schools, pulling the Bible out of schools, pulling prayer out of schools. We have to be lectured over and over and over again about the separation of church and state. But now all of a sudden, in New York City, we can have days of Islam prayer in the mayor's office, and bringing it into schools and shutting down cities so that we can all bring our rugs out into the middle of the street and pray to Allah and whatever else. What about the separation of church and state? What about never forgetting? What about all of these different things that were like 25 years ago that most people in this room probably have vivid memories of? That growing up in school, I was only 1.5 years old when that happened, but every single year on September 11th, we would sit and the whole day would just be about September 11th. What happened, right?
Right.
We forgot. It's the slogan, never forget, never forget, never forget, and then we forgot. It's hard to, come to grips with, honestly. It's saddening to see what happens. It's saddening to see what happens to our country. But the point is that when we look at the children of Israel and we see the different things that the children of Israel go through and that they have these great things happen to them, they have these great victories that the Lord has given them, they're asked to put up memorials, they're asked to remember things, and then all of a sudden they just completely forget them, we're the exact same way.
True.
So it's easy to get frustrated and say, well, the parting of the Red Sea, how could you guys go and make a golden calf 3 months later? What about all of the things that we do in America? What about the foundation of this country that we had that was built on Christian principles, that was built to give us the ability to come over here and worship Jesus Christ, not Allah or anyone else? You can go back, obviously we've got the freedom of religion, but if you go back and look at all 13 colonies, you know who was named in the documents of every single one of these 13 colonies? Jesus Christ. And you know what the laws were based around? The Bible and Christianity.
Right.
And slowly over time, that's just kind of dwindled away. There's been a lot of, backwards misinterpretation of what those documents' original intents were. But we, make no mistake about it, and don't ever let anyone tell you otherwise, America was founded as a Christian nation. Right. And we should be doing everything in our power and our ability to make sure that it stays that way. So that we do not forget what God has done for this nation in the same way that the children of Israel forgot what God did for them in their lifetime. Right? So now bringing this back in and thinking about some of the holidays that we celebrate now. So, September 11th isn't necessarily a holiday, but it's a day of remembrance. It's something that we think about. The 4th of July, Memorial Day, those are holidays. Those are times that we get together and we remember very specific things. But we've got two major holidays that we already have that are directly tied to Christianity, which would be Christmas, which we celebrated a few months ago, which is celebrating the birth of Jesus Christ, the virgin birth of Jesus Christ, the only one that's ever been that way, the only one that ever will be that way. Right. Where we can remember the life of Jesus Christ, we can remember what he came for, we can remember that he was born to die, we can sing the different Christmas songs about being, away in a manger, and Oh Little Town of Bethlehem, and everything else that we sing. We can do the Christmas program, we can just have this time of remembrance of the birth of Jesus Christ. And now, 2 weeks away, we've got Easter, which would be where we're remembering the death of Jesus Christ, right before that, the burial, and the resurrection of Jesus Christ, which is our salvation. Right. And we specifically have these two holidays where it's even more so that people in this country are more receptive to the gospel. They're more open to hearing these things. They're more open to coming to church. They're more open to seeing what the Bible actually says about these things because they are holidays, right? And as much as, corporations and marketing teams and whoever else wants to try to cloud over Christmas and make it all about gumdrops and rainbows and candy canes and whatever else there is, and then we've got Easter now, which is all just about rabbits that lay eggs and everything else. And we have these fun things, but still, I believe firmly that the Bible shines through all of that stuff. Amen. And that Easter and Christmas is about Jesus Christ. Amen. And Easter and Christmas will always be about Jesus Christ. Right. And when we come, and that Sunday and that Easter Sunday, just like every other Sunday, we will be worshiping and singing songs about Jesus Christ, that he died on the cross, he was buried and rose again, and remembering our gospel and our salvation. And it's easy on Christmas and Easter to remember those days. But what about the Tuesday, 3 weeks after Easter? What are we doing then? What are we doing in our homes? What are we doing with our life? What are we doing when we wake up in the morning? What are we doing before we go to bed at night? Are we remembering the Lord? Because there's so many times where we'll sit, and especially, I think prayer requests are the best example of this, where we will think about how great God moves in certain situations. And especially like when we've got situations where people are going through cancer treatments, and it's like we can go to the doctor, and doctors might even give the look of just, I don't know if there's anything we're going to be able to do here, and people just pray over and over and over and over again. And still today we can really see God and that power that part of the Red Sea, clean that cancer up, clear people out, they're good, they're set and on their way cancer-free and ready to live the rest of their lives. And it's like in those moments, it's just we're praising God in the moment. We're so happy. We're so thankful. What happens months later? That's right. Are we still praising the Lord? Are we still thinking about that? Because here's the reality. And if you've been saved long enough, you'll understand that God isn't moving mountains for you every single day. Some days are just normal days. I remember when I was 18 years old and we were getting married, and I had to find a way to get approved for an apartment where I was the sole provider, and I had been working a job as a contractor for like a month, making $12 an hour. No credit score, no payment history, anything else. And I had to convince some apartment that I was going to be able to pay my bills and I was going to do a good job. Nowhere would take us. It wouldn't do anything. And we would just be week after week after week. I mean, I don't know how many apartment complexes Janae went and toured and just, nothing. We'd go to fill out an application. I'd make that I was making $12 an hour. I would give them my boss's phone numbers. Hey, I'm a good worker. You can reference me. But I had 1 month of job history. Not really interested. And then I just remember one day, I was driving on the road, and I'm not giving excuses for talking on the phone while you're driving. But, I got a phone call while I was driving on the road. It was from an apartment complex in Groveport that basically let us know, we're fine to let you have the apartment. And I just remember immediately I hung up and I called Janae and I was like, God just got us this apartment. That there's no way, this doesn't make sense. This is so incredible. But, the thing is now, I have a payment history, I have a pretty good credit score, I've got a good job history, and so I'm not really getting down on my knees begging God to open doors in that same way that I needed him to when I was 18 years old.
Right.
But I cannot forget God, and I cannot forget that happened, and I can't forget his involvement in those situations, because there's absolutely no situation that I could say that I can get myself in or a point that I can achieve where I just don't need God at all anymore. I'm not really.
Right.
And what we need to do is be able to work through all of the normalcy in life in our normal day when we wake up and eat our normal breakfast and we get in the car and drive to our normal jobs, that we still are remembering God, even when we don't need some massive mountain moved in order to get through the day.
Amen.
It's like we remember our point of salvation, we remember our time and our ability to be able to, just all the great blessings that God has given us and all of the great intervention. Something that I was thinking about when I was writing this sermon, we're a little less than 2 months away, and we'll be having our 4th baby. And every time that, we have a baby, whether it was through, more natural birth with Gabriel or, the C-section that we had with Noah when I was still in the room, and it was like kind of in the COVID era. It wasn't really in the COVID era, but we were in Illinois, and that was still in the COVID era, about two years longer than everybody else was. But so I remember being in the room, and like we had to have all this, almost like a, nuclear protection suit on or whatever else. But, still, seeing Noah get pulled out of there, brings tears to my eyes, and just how happy I am and things like that. When you see your child be born, it's like this amazing miracle moment. I mean, you're just so thankful, you're so happy, you're so excited. That's the most beautiful baby that's ever been born. But the thing to think about is like there's hospital staff that's in that room, and you're just like one of the few people that's coming in to give birth that day, and this is just what they see every single day.
Right.
So it's this amazing miracle to you, even if it's your 4th child. But it's like the 1,000th that they've seen. It's not that big of a deal anymore, And so again, in another way, the longer that you go, the more that you see God intervene, the more that you see God get involved in situations, maybe it's a little bit less impactful than it is the first time you saw God get involved in a situation. Don't lose that joy. Don't lose that appreciation for God's involvement in your life and the ability to get in situations and make a difference in them. We're supposed to deeply appreciate and remember the things that God has done for us. And you think about some of the ordinances that he gave the church, which would be baptism and the Lord's Supper. We've got our table right down here. What does it say? This do in remembrance of me.
Right.
Because the things that he did for us happened 2,000 years ago when he died on the cross, when they had that Lord's Supper and everything else that came with it. And he gave bread to the disciples. I want you to go to the book of, let me see, I believe it's in Matthew. Yeah, Matthew chapter number 9. And there were several times where the Pharisees or the Sadducees or the chief priests would come and they would question Jesus about why his disciples didn't behave correctly, or why they didn't do all of the things that they were supposed to do. And look in Matthew chapter number 9, in verse number 14. It says, this was actually not the Pharisees. This was the disciples of John. But it said, then came to him the disciples of John, saying, why do we and the Pharisees fast oft, but thy disciples fast not? And Jesus said unto them, can the children of the bride chamber mourn as long as the bridegroom is with them? But the days will come when the bridegroom shall be taken from them, and then shall they fast. No man putteth a piece of new cloth into an old garment, for that which is put in to fill it up taketh from the garment, and the rent is made worse. Neither do men put new wine into old bottles, else the bottles break, and the wine runneth out, and the bottles perish, but they put new wine into new bottles, and both are preserved. So he's basically saying at this point that he's there with them, and that every single day they're seeing a new miracle. You can get to the end of the book of John, and there's several miracles that we think about, which would be the feeding of the 5,000 being one, raising Lazarus from the dead, the story of the young girl that Jesus basically says, she's whole and goes in and just asks her to stand up, and the same thing, right? She's raised from the dead. You can think about stories of the blind being healed, the ones that couldn't walk being healed, the ones that were deaf being healed. There's all these different things. So every single day, though, even more so than that, the end of the book of John says that there's not a library in the world big enough to hold a book that told about all of the miracles that they experienced. So every single day, these disciples saw something amazing happen. And when it's just every single day, it's pretty hard to forget, right? But think about Peter. When Christ is taken from them, and just the smallest period of time goes by, when he just got done saying that he would never forsake him, he would never say that he didn't know him, and he denies him 3 times, right in a row, right? Just that short period of time, Christ is taken from him, and he denies him. We have to understand, and we have to look in the mirror and recognize we are forgetful people.
That's right.
Especially when it comes to the things of God.
Right.
Especially when it comes to all of the divine intervention and things that we can't really explain any other way than God getting involved or something like that. And so it's almost like our mind plays this weird trick on us where it's like, we didn't really do that. We don't have to think that much about it because we just know God takes care of that. But it's like we forget to recognize the importance of God taking care of that at the same time. So it's easy to say, well, God takes care of that. I'm going to go worry about whatever I'm doing and watch the football game or whatever else is on and not think about anything that God has done for me. I'm definitely not saying that football is not something to watch if you know who I am. I love football. But it's easy to get distracted, especially in the world that we live in today where just everything on social media is just kind of a magnet to the eyes, and we've all got the attention span of goldfish now, at least my generation does, to forget about things. But God specifically says over and over and over again that we're to remember him. We're given the Lord's Supper to do in remembrance of him. We're told all throughout the Old Testament to remember the things that the Lord has done, remember all of the things that he's done, and we have to understand we are a forgetful people. We can look at the children of Israel and we can be frustrated with the Red Sea and that they were upset there. I get frustrated just reading along and seeing them being taken out of captivity in the land of Egypt. And before the Red Sea's parted, before they'd even faced some type of persecution, they were complaining to Moses about, you just brought us out here to die.
Amen.
What were you doing in Egypt? We're just going to die there. If you're just curious about dying, the same exact thing is going to happen to you there. But so it's just this constant complaining and this ability to get frustrated. We're the exact same way. It's starting to get a little bit hot outside. Would you all be happy if the air conditioner broke and all of a sudden it was like 85 degrees in here? You might be kind of looking at me like, wrap it up. I got to get out to my air-conditioned car. We got to go. We're fast to complain, right? We're fast to forget things. We're fast to be thankful, to not be thankful. We're fast to just move on through the rest of our lives. This thing happened. Okay, this is cool. Move on to the rest of the things. And I guess the only thing that I'm really trying to get across tonight is that we have been given the ability to read our Bibles, to read these stories. We've been given so many blessings in our life from God that we almost can get used to them and that it can become normal and something that we just expect. And we forget the significance and we forget the sacrifice and we forget the love that God gave to us. In the same way that we forget the sacrifice that the men and the women that have died for this country have done, and we just live our lives and we think about them not even happening, is the same way that we forget about what Jesus did for us, we forget about what God did for the children of Israel, and we forget about everything in life. So we need to purposefully, intentionally remember the Lord. and do things to remember him and think about him. And in Matthew chapter number 9, where basically it talks about how Jesus was with them in that day, they didn't need to mourn, they didn't need to fast. Conversely, we are in the time period where Jesus has been taken away from us. Now, we have the Holy Spirit, but Jesus is not physically standing in this room preaching to you and performing miracles and doing all of these different things. We are living in a time period where we do not physically see him. And we don't physically get to experience these blessings. So you know what that means? It says, when the bridegroom shall be taken away from them, then shall they fast. That we should fast. That we should put these things in remembrance. That we've got the Lord's Supper that we do in remembrance of him. That we spend this time where we come together and we come as a congregation, we listen to the preaching of his word. We sing praises to him through songs. We pray for one another. We think about all of these different things. And really what we're just doing is every single day that we come into this church, whether that's Sunday morning at our normal scheduled time, or that's Tuesday night during a revival, or that's Saturday morning before we go out and knock doors or whatever else, we're coming together to remember the Lord and encourage one another to live godly lives, walk in the Spirit, and live out so that we can reach the world with the gospel.
Amen.
So think about these things. Every head bowed, every eye closed. Let's think about remembering the Lord.